Heidi, Part 3. For days there had been mysterious happenings in the Sussman household. No matter how fast the door was barred at night, when the servants went downstairs in the morning, it was always open. It could not be a thief, nothing was ever missing. Could it be a ghost? This thought made Fraulein so nervous that she would not go into any of the empty rooms without Tinette. Tinette would not go upstairs or down unless Sebastian went along. Sebastian never peeped into the dark corner unless John the footman were at his heels, nor would John go anywhere without Sebastian. All day long the cook would say, "That I should live to hear such a thing." Of course, no one spoke of these things before the children. Fraulein finally persuaded Sebastian and John to sit up all night and find out who was doing the mischief. One evening they armed themselves with several weapons and took up their watch. They ate and talked and dozed. Around midnight, Sebastian tried to rouse John, but could not. Then at 1 o'clock, John sat up and said, as though he were a man of courage, "Come, Sebastian, we must see what's going on." But as he stepped into the hall, a gust of wind blew out the candle, and he fell back against Sebastian, nearly upsetting him. When Sebastian lighted the candle again, John was as white as a ghost. "What did you see?" Sebastian asked. "It's open," gasped John, "and there's a white figure on the stairs." Shivering, they sat down and did not stir from their seats until daybreak. Then they went out and closed and barred the door, and hastened to tell Fraulein of their experience. Fraulein could stand the strain of this mystery no longer. She wrote that very day to Herr Sussman about it, asking him to come at once. But Herr Sussman had his own ideas about ghosts. "You and the servants should be able to solve this mystery," he replied. "If not, write for my mother to come. She is not afraid of anything." So Fraulein wrote to Frau Sussman. Frau Sussman answered that she had no intention of returning to look for a ghost. "If there's one in that house, it must be alive, and you ought to be able to deal with it, Rottenmeier," she wrote. Now Fraulein was angry. Herr Sussman must come home, and she knew a way to bring him home. She wrote him that the ghost was making Clara more and more nervous, and that she might become very ill unless something were done about it. He came on the next train. Herr Sussman suspected Sebastian of playing tricks on Fraulein, and began at once to question him. But he soon saw that Sebastian was as frightened as Fraulein. So he sent for his friend, the doctor who attended Clara, and that night they took up their watch in the same room in which Sebastian and John had waited. They lighted a candle and laid their loaded revolvers between them. Then they talked and waited until the clock struck 12. Then 1. And then they heard the bar of the outer door being lifted. "Who's there?" roared the doctor, opening the door. A little white figure turned. It was Heidi, barefooted and shivering. "What are you doing here, child?" asked the kindly doctor. Heidi did not know. The doctor lifted her in his arms, carried her upstairs, and put her in her bed. When she stopped trembling, he asked if she had been dreaming. "Yes," she said. "I dream every night of being at home with grandfather. But when I wake in the morning, I am always in my bed in Frankfurt." When the doctor heard this, he said, "Go to sleep now, Heidi. Everything will be all right tomorrow." He went downstairs and told Herr Sessman she must go back at once to her mountains. She's sick and thin as a skeleton. Herr Sessman was shocked that this should have happened in his house without anyone's noticing it. But first, we must make her sound and strong, he protested. Her illness cannot be cured by pills, the doctor said, adding that if she were sent home at once, she might recover in the mountain air. Herr Sessman understood and agreed. At daybreak, he went upstairs and awakened Fraulein and the servants. Come down at once, he ordered. We must prepare for a journey. Frightened, they jumped out of their beds. Had the ghosts attacked the master? And were they being called to his assistance? With pale faces, they crept into the dining room. John was sent for the carriage, Sebastian to bring Diet to the house, Tinette to wake Heidi and dress her. Just then, Fraulein came into the room, so befuddled that she had put her cap on backwards. Herr Sessman told her to get out a trunk and pack all Heidi's things in it, and a good part of Clara's, too. Meanwhile, he would go up to wake his daughter and break the news to her. Clara was distressed at losing her companion, but when her father explained that Heidi was homesick, she understood. Just let Heidi's trunk be brought in here so that I may put in some things for her, she said. Sebastian returned with Diet at his heels, in a great state of excitement. Why was Heidi being sent home? As for herself, she was sorry, but she could not get away just now. Her mistress needed her. She was thinking of Uncle's last words to her, and did not want to see him again. So Sebastian was put in charge of the little girl on her journey. When you stop at the hotel tonight, Herr Sessman warned him, be sure her windows are fastened so that they cannot be easily opened. After Heidi is in bed, lock the door of her room on the outside, for she walks in her sleep and might hurt herself if she went wandering downstairs and tried to open the front door. Do you understand? So that was it, Sebastian exclaimed, remembering the open door. Yes, said Herr Sessman, and you are all idiots for not finding it out for yourselves. And with that, Herr Sessman went off to his study to write a letter to the uncle. Perhaps Heidi was the most surprised of all at being called so early in the morning. Tinette put on her best dress without telling her why. When Herr Sessman explained that she was going back to her grandfather, she was too excited to eat. She ran up to Clara's room to wait for the carriage. See what I have put in the trunk for you, cried Clara, pointing to it in the middle of the room. Then she showed her dresses and aprons and handkerchiefs and other lovely things. And look here, she added, as she held up a basket. Inside were 12 soft white rolls for the grandmother. Heidi had never been happier. Someone announced that the carriage was ready, and Heidi ran to her room to get her book from under her pillow. Then she took her shawl from the closet, put her old hat in it, and placed the two on top of her basket. Fraulein tried to take the shawl from her, but Herr Sessman said she might keep it. Soon Heidi was on her way to the train, the basket of rolls on her knees. Are you sure the grandmother is not dead? She kept asking Sebastian. I don't see why she should be, he would answer, and Heidi would be comforted for a while. When they reached Mayenfield, Sebastian found a man with a cart who agreed to take Heidi to Dorfli. I can go by myself from there, Heidi said. Sebastian paid the man well for his trouble. then handed the little girl a package for herself and a letter for her grandfather from Herr Sessman, and told her to take good care not to lose them. She put them in her basket under the rolls. The peaks looked down on Heidi like old friends, and the trees seemed to wave a welcome home. She thought the cart would never reach Dorfli, but at last it stopped and she jumped out, still holding her basket. "Thank you," she said to the man. "Grandfather will come for the trunk tomorrow." Would she find the grandmother by the spinning wheel? She kept asking herself that question as she hurried up the steep path. At last she saw the little hut in the hollow and ran in, calling, "Grandmother, grandmother, I'm back." The grandmother was just too surprised to speak, but when she put her hand on Heidi's hair, she said, "It is indeed the little girl. God has granted my prayer." Heidi laid the rolls in the old woman's lap. "There, grandmother," she said. "Now you won't have to eat hard bread for days." Peter's mother was as surprised and happy as the grandmother was to see Heidi. "What a pretty hat you have on," she said. "You shall have it, for I do not need it any more," said Heidi. She put on the old hat that she had worn when she went away. She remembered what grandfather had said about Deet and her feathers. Then she took off her pretty dress and put on her old shawl. "I want grandfather to see me as I used to be, so he will surely know me," she said, and hurried up the mountain. How good it was to be home again. Everything was even more beautiful than she had remembered it. At last she saw the tops of the fir trees, then the roof of her grandfather's hut, then the whole of it. There before it, as in old days, sat grandfather puffing away at his pipe. Heidi dropped her basket and rushed to him, flinging her arms round his neck. "Grandfather, grandfather," was all she could say. The old man took Heidi on his knees and looked at her. "Did they send you away?" he asked. "Oh, no, grandfather. They were very kind. I just wanted to come back to you. I think it's all in the letter," she said, handing it and the package to him. But he gave the package back, saying, "That's yours." The letter he read and put in his pocket. "Now you must have some milk," grandfather said, rising to go inside. "Bring the package with you. There is money in it for you. You can buy a nice bed and bedclothes and dresses for a couple years with it." "I don't want the money. I have a bed, and Clara gave me plenty of dresses," Heidi said. "Take it and put it in the cupboard. You will want it some day, I have no doubt." Heidi obeyed and skipped happily after her grandfather into the house. She looked into every corner of the room. Then she ran up the ladder to the loft above. "Oh, grandfather, my bed's gone," she said. Grandfather said they would make another. Later, as they sat at the table eating, Heidi said, "Grandfather, this is the best milk in the world." The old man smiled. "So you're back again," exclaimed Peter, when he came with the goats. "Will you go up the mountain tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow, but the day after, perhaps," said Heidi. "For tomorrow I must go down to see the grandmother." That night, grandfather went up the ladder a dozen times to make sure Heidi was not going to walk in her sleep, as Herr Sessman wrote she had done in the Frankfurt. But Heidi was resting well. She was in her own mountains again with her grandfather, happier than she had been since she left. The next morning, grandfather went to Dorfli for the trunk, while Heidi stopped at Peter's hut to see how the grandmother liked her rolls. "I believe they have made me stronger already," the old woman told her, with a grateful smile. I shall write Clara to send you more when these are gone, Heidi promised. Then she thought of the money Herr Sessman had given her. She would use that to buy more rolls. No, no, I cannot let you. It's your money, the grandmother said. But Heidi was determined. She was sure if the grandmother grew strong, she would be able to see again. Shall I read you one of the hymns from your book? Heidi asked a moment later. The grandmother could hardly believe a child so young could read when Peter did not know one word from another. But Heidi got the book off the shelf and read until the old woman's face was alight with joy. The grandfather knocked at the window. Heidi left, promising to come back the next day. When she told her grandfather that she wanted to use her money to buy rolls for the grandmother, he asked, "But what about your bed? It would be nice to have a proper bed." Heidi replied that she slept better on hay than on her fine bed in Frankfurt. "The money is yours. Do what you like with it," he agreed then. For a while they walked along in silence. Suddenly Heidi said, "Everything has turned out as Grandmama said it would. If I had come home when I wanted to, the grandmother would have had only a few rolls, and I would not have been able to read to her. I'm glad God did not let me have what I asked for at once. Now I shall always pray to God, and when He does not do anything I ask for, I shall think to myself, perhaps He is going to do something better still. We will pray every day now, won't we? And never forget Him again." "What if one has forgotten God?" asked Grandfather. "Then everything goes wrong. Grandmama told me so," Heidi answered. "And people say you ran away from God when He would have helped you if you had let Him. But if we have forgotten God, we cannot go back," Grandfather murmured. "Oh, yes, we can. There's a story in my book that explains it." When they reached home, she got down her book and read the story aloud. It was of the prodigal son who, when he had wasted his life and money, went back to see his father and was forgiven. "You see," said Heidi, "we can go back." That night, as she lay asleep, Grandfather stood looking at her a long time. Then he prayed, "Father, I have sinned against God and man. I am not worthy to be called thy son." Early the next morning, Grandfather called up to Heidi, "Put on your best dress and come down. We're going to church." She was too surprised to ask any questions, but it did not take her long to get ready. When she came down the ladder, there stood Grandfather in a coat with shining silver buttons. "Grandfather," she cried, "I've never seen you look so nice." As they walked down the mountain, the church bells rang out from the valley below, and the nearer they walked, the sweeter the music. By the time they reached the church, the congregation had gathered and was singing. Women turned to look and lost their places in their books. "See that?" they whispered. "The Alm Uncle has come to church." The pastor was happy indeed. When the services were over, Grandfather took Heidi to the pastor's home. Then how the people talked. "Maybe he's not so bad after all," some said. "See how he takes the little one by the hand." The Alm Uncle announced he was going to follow the pastor's advice and move to Dorfli the next winter so that Heidi could go to school. The pastor was pleased and shook his hand warmly. Now the congregation, too, went up to shake hands, each trying to be first. and when the alm uncle told them he was going to move to Dorfley for the winter, they walked halfway up the mountain with him. "Grandfather, you just look nicer and nicer today," Heidi said when they were alone. He smiled. "It is good to be at peace with God and man," he said. "God was good when he sent you to my hut." This time, when they reached Peter's house, the two walked in together. "Good morning, grandmother," said Uncle. "That I should live to see such a thing!" exclaimed the surprised old woman. "May God reward you for all you have done for me, and if I have ever injured you, do not punish me by sending the child away again while I live." "Have no fears," said Uncle. Just then Peter rushed in with a letter for Heidi, the first she had ever had. It was from Clara. She told her how they missed her in Frankfurt, and promised that next summer she and Grandmama would come to visit her. "Grandmama," she wrote, "is sending some coffee to go with the grandmother's rolls." There was such excitement at all this news that no one noticed how the time was passing, until Uncle reminded Heidi they must be going home. "Come again soon," the grandmother said, and Uncle promised they would the very next day. As he and Heidi climbed up the mountain toward home, the evening chimes rang out like a lovely song. Heidi was happier than she had been in all her life, and so, I think, was her grandfather. Join me next time for more adventures.